Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm Jeff Beston, Chief Marketing Officer of Intuilab, and it will be my pleasure today to discuss the new features in version 4.5 of Intuiface. We'll be joined today by Sebastian Meunier. My colleague will be monitoring the chat window for this webinar. If any of you have questions, just enter them in the chat window. Sebastian will write them down and will either interrupt me in the middle of this webinar, or I'll find certain points in time where I pause and we'll ask for questions as well to make sure that everything is clear by the end of this webinar.
Morning, everyone.
Oh, thank you, Seb. So there are three core features we want to highlight in this webinar. Lots of other smaller improvements have been made to the product as well, as we typically do for releases, but there are three major ones. And what makes me especially pleased about this release is these are all big vote getters. Some of you who are currently using the product may be familiar with what we call Idea Scale. It's a place where we collect votes for features we don't have yet that people might be interested in. You can imagine some features we build into the product. They're features that are just suitable for our roadmap, for our vision for the product. And there are others that maybe we didn't think of or that weren't a priority, but they're so popular in Idea Scale that we increase their priority for us and we deliver them. Not that the three features we'll discuss today weren't on our roadmap, but they were very big vote getters. So I think we'll have a lot of users pleased with version 4.5. In this webinar, we'll discuss animation and effects. We will discuss media sharing, including a native email capability in Intuiface. And we'll discuss the ability to publish and share experiences directly from Composer. We'll touch on each one of these individually. Those of you who are paying very close attention might notice that the Intuiface icon in the lower left is breathing. This is a cheap way to show you animation in action, is to enable this kind of effect. Let's jump out of play mode. I'm going to go into Composer. This webinar is meant to instruct you as well as inform you. So we'll be spending all of our time inside Composer, and we'll see how to build a lot of these effects. This is Composer. For those of you not familiar with the product, this is an introduction to the new features, not an overview of existing features. So if something is a little foreign to you, our apologies, but other webinars are on the way to give you more of an introductory view. I'm going to create a scenario that allows me to use these three effects. I'm going to create an attract space that encourages people to approach the screen and interact with it. And I'm going to create an image selector space where visitors to the kiosk can select images they want to email to themselves. This scenario will allow me to show you these three features. So the first thing I need to do is create two more spaces. So let me add one space that we will call the attract space. And I'm going to add a fourth space we'll call the image selector space. Whoops. So these are the two spaces we're going to create during this webinar. Let me reorder them so conclusion is where it belongs. Okay, here we are on the attract space. I want to attract attention. We could do that with a static image, but intuitively we understand that if the image is static, it doesn't capture attention. It looks like a sign, which captures attention as well as all signs do, which is not so well. What we want to do is add something that will have a little bit of movement to catch people's eye. Let's do the classic technique. We're going to take a finger, add it to our experience, and we want that finger to breathe. Okay? We're going to create that breathing effect you saw in the previous space with the Intuiface icon. To do that, I'm going to work off the space. Animation, this new capability in Intuiface, is still just a set of actions. Like all the other actions we already support in the product, animation is another set of actions that needs to be triggered. The trigger we're going to use here is a timer on the space itself. So in the Triggers and Actions panel, I'm going to specify that after 0.1 seconds have elapsed on the space, then I want to cause that hand to breathe. So I'm selecting the hand, I'm selecting position, size, orientation, and then resize by factor, and we'll change this to 1.3. Now you could actually do this in version 4.3. You could set a scale factor. The problem is it would just essentially move to that scale factor. You couldn't modify the way it would operate with any level of flexibility. This Show Timing and Animation button exposes the new capability we've introduced in 4.5 to manage animation. At the top, you can see a timeline. This allows me to choreograph multiple animation actions occurring at the same time. I could have multiple actions off the same trigger. I get a different row for each action in the timeline, and I can manage, do they all start at the same time? Do they start in a staggered fashion? Do they start one after overlapping? That sort of thing. And then at the bottom, a set of configuration parameters for the specific animation action we have selected to the left. In this case, I want to scale the hand icon by a factor of 1.3, but I want that to have a breathing effect. I don't want to just scale it and leave it alone. So the idea is, let's add a little bit of duration to this breathing effect. So it'll take 1 second. I want it to occur indefinitely, not just one time, not 2 times, indefinitely until the end of time. Either we navigate away from the space or the experience is ended. Now, this will just repeat over and over and over again. Okay? Actually, let's make this 2 seconds so you have a little more visibility to the breathing effect. Now, here's the really cool aspect of our animation capability. I can preview it. If I push play, notice the hand breathing. I am able to preview my animation to make sure it's doing what I want it to do. Great. It's working. So now I'm just going to add a little message to my space. Let's give it a black font. And we will say touch screen to begin. Now we have a message and a breathing hand. I'm going to add them into a group so I can manipulate them collectively. We have a breathing hand. We have a message. We're missing navigation away from the space. We're encouraging people to approach. We're encouraging people to touch the space, but nothing's going to happen if they touch the screen. We need to create something that will capture that touch event, enabling us to then transition to a new space in our experience. So let's start by adding a button, and I'm going to move it to the front. Okay. So this means it's going to be in front of everything else in our space. Let me get rid of the text, open up the Properties panel, we'll make it flat, and then I'm going to reduce the opacity to 0. So it's there, you just can't see it. Finally, let me modify the size so it covers the entire space. Now what we have in front is a button that will capture touch events, but visitors to the kiosk can't see it, which is a very common technique for those using Intuiface, is to hide assets, particularly buttons, that will capture events. But from the user's perspective, there's nothing to see. For example, you could put buttons on a map, right? This would be one way to do that. We now have a button. It's in front of everything else. It's ready to capture events. I just then need to tell it what to do. We're going to do 2 things when the button is pressed. We're going to fade away into using the blur effect, touch screen to begin, and the hand. The first thing that will happen when we touch the button, let's fade that group. So when the button is released, here's the group. Sorry, effects, apply effects. One of the new features in Intuiface are these effects. I can blur any asset or collection. I'm going to maximize the blur, and I'll say that it should take, let's say, 1 second. All right. Then I want to navigate from the space. I want to go to the image selector space. So after that happens, I'm going to add another action, which is space-to-base navigation. And we'll go to the image selector space with, we'll call it a fade. Now notice there's a problem. Right now, the blur effect won't have time to finish. If you look at the timeline, they overlap. They start at the same time. We will navigate from this space immediately, which means we won't be able to observe the blur effect we just added. But I can fix this. I can just take my navigation action and drag it across the timeline to make sure it occurs after the blur effect. And now we can navigate away from the space. I want to do one other animation option because it's a cool way to use animation to create a little more energy and action in the user experience. We've just selected a blur action for when we navigate away. I want to create a move to action when we first enter the space. If you'll recall, we have a timer, and when the timer lapses 0.1 seconds, we cause the hand to breathe. I want something else to happen. Let's zoom out, and I want to take, let's lock the button. I want to take this group and start it out here so you can't see it, and then move it in just before the hand breathes. So I'm going to add another action with this timer, which is to, let's see, I want you to see the hand here. Here's the group, and we are going to move it into the space. Here's another really cool feature of animation. You see this little button over here? I can guess the right XY coordinate for the group in this space in terms of positioning, or I can just click this button, slide it where I want it to go, and then click this button in the bottom right, and it automatically records where that needs to occur. And then I will delay this by 0.5 seconds. You see that? So now the group will move in, and then the breathing will start. Let's test all the work we've done. Play. It slides into view. The hand starts breathing. I touch the screen with my finger, 3, 2, 1, touch, and then we navigate to the new space. I hope that looked easy. It sure is. And that's just some basic capabilities for animation. Virtually any parameter in Intuiface that has a range of values can be animated from one value to another. Could be position, could be size, could be rotation, could be anything you can think of that has multiple values can then be animated. Done. Let's now talk about the selector space. We've navigated to this new space. The idea on this one is enabling the visitors to select images that they will then email to themselves.
So just before we switch to the second chapter, a few points at the questions from our guests.
Great.
Not that many questions actually, because the only one I got is, can I make items come in from outside the space? So yes, as you could see, Jeff could move the group and the hand outside of the space and make it appear on the timer using the same animation mechanism. And then we got more feedback saying that's a great new feature. So thank you, guests. That's very nice. We can go to the next one, next chapter.
Thank you, Seb. Yeah, I must have jumped on the animation, the slide before someone asked for it. It's a great technique, just like the hidden button. This ability to hide things off the edge of the screen, but they're still there, allows you to create layered effects, enabling you to add more content to a space rather than having to separate things across multiple spaces, doing a lot of navigation. It's a good technique that hopefully you can use. We're now moving on to discuss sharing, media sharing with email. We've discussed animation. We'll now touch media sharing with email. First, we need to start with something to share. So I'm going to add a bunch of images to my space. So here we have some images that I will add as a collection. Those of you who use Intuiface, you know we default to the acid grid collection, which is perfectly nice, but I think we'll try carousel. I always think that's a very pretty way to show content. Let's change the viewing angle, and we'll make these a little bit bigger and tweak just a couple aspects. I want to tap item to open, and we don't have to see shadows. There we go. So now we have our carousel. We want to enable visitors to browse through the carousel, select an item, and ultimately email it to themselves. Of course, we're not putting instructions in this space, just that's what needs to happen here. We have 4 media sharing interface assets introduced in version 4.5. Sharing via the file system, sharing via USB, copying to a USB drive, and 2 email options. All 4 of these interfaces can be used to share media. 2 of them are really save as, essentially copying assets to a local drive, to a USB drive. Email It's using the items as attachments. I'm adding the selected shared items as attachments to an email. The difference between the two email options is that the hosted option is a free email service that we provide to our customers. You don't need your own email server for this to work. You just need to be on the internet, and we will send the email for you. Even the free edition can send emails. There's a limit to the number of emails you can send per day with the free edition, but even the free edition can be used to send emails. The only compromise is that there's a little message at the end of the email that says, sent you from an Intuiface experience. Just like if you send an email from your iPhone, it defaults to sent from my iPhone. If you're using the hosted free email option in Intuiface, there's a little message that says, sent from an experience. Alternatively, there's the configurable email option. This allows me to use my own mail server. If I add this to my space and you look at the properties panel at the bottom of Composer, you can see where I can specify information relevant to my own email server. Then you don't have the little message at the end, and you have a record of all of the emails that you've sent. You can even get responses to your emails in the same inbox. You understand. For this demonstration, I'm going to use the hosted version, so I'm going to add the hosted email option to my space. So how do we add items as attachments to an email? By dragging this interface into the scene, we create what we call the data template for that interface asset. It is a default representation of the capability of that interface. You don't have to use it. You don't have to insert it. It is not mandatory at all. It is simply here to help our users initially understand how to use these interfaces, any interface, not just sharing, and then possibly leverage it to modify the look and feel of their experience. I am adding it because we can watch the queue. The way we do media sharing in Intuiface is by adding items, assets, to a queue. Anything in the queue can be shared. You can save it to the file system, save it to a USB drive, add it as an attachment. If it's in the queue, you can share it. When I dragged in my email interface asset, you now see the queue. This little image on the right is illustrating that if you want to add things to the queue, you need to show the sharing button. So how do we do that? Here I am in my collection. I'm highlighting all of the images inside the collection, and I'm going to turn on the sharing tool. Show the sharing button. This means that anytime an image's sharing button is selected, it is added to the queue. Let's see that right now. If I push play, I rotate my carousel. Okay, I can go over here. So let's do the mountains. I pop out a copy. There's the sharing button. I can manipulate this as I could any other image. Push the sharing button, and now it's in my queue. It's a toggle, by the way. If I deselect it, it's out. If I select it, it's in. And I can add other items as well. So I can take this one, add it to the queue, and I have multiple items in the queue. I'm going to say this one more time. You don't have to show the queue. Once the interface asset is added to your experience, the queue is there, whether you see it in your experience or not. I'm using it to illustrate how it actually works. If I were to, let's take one out and click the send button, and I put in an email address, intuilabdemo@gmail.com, and click send, it is now sending an email to that email address with all of the items that are in the queue. In this case, there's only one item in the queue. This particular data template is pre-filled with a subject line and body text, but you could customize that yourself. All of that is customizable. If I look at my inbox, here's the email I just sent from the experience. It's sent to me. Here's the subject line, email from an Intuiface-based experience. This is the body text. You can change that. You could change the subject text. Here's the line that we insert because you're using the hosted version of our interface, our email interface asset, and here's the image that we attached. Nice. You use any of the media sharing options, add items to the queue. Now be aware, there are other ways to add items to the queue. The brute force way, the most visual way, is to use the sharing button. Under the covers, there are actions that can also be used to add items to the queue. So you don't have to use the sharing button directly associated with an asset. There are other ways to add items to the queue as well. This is the most obvious way to do it. Now, since I'm a fan of the drag effect, I want to do a little bit more with animation before we move on to publishing. Let's try that slide technique again. So let me zoom out. I'm going to take this guy and move it right off the screen. The trigger for moving the queue into the space will be if an item is added to the queue. The trigger for moving the queue off the space is if the queue is emptied. Let's see how we do that. The queue is associated with the interface asset itself, so I'm going to select the interface asset and open up the Triggers and Actions panel, selecting the Sharing Queue Item Added trigger. When an item is added to the sharing queue, then I want to move the queue into the space. And you've seen me do this already. I click this little button, I drag this in, click the Stop Capture button in the bottom right, and there we are. I'll increase the duration by a little bit. It'll take 1 second. Great. One more action. If the queue is cleared, I want to move the queue off the screen. Move 2. It's already off the screen, so these coordinates are already correct. I don't have to do anything else. Okay. Let's test our work. Here's my beautiful carousel. I'm partial to the jellyfish, so I'm going to add it to my queue. And in slides the queue with the item that I've just added. If I take anything out of the queue, like so, it slides off. Really simple. But imagine what you can do in your experiences and your clients' experiences with just these little additional capabilities, let alone all of the other options for animation. I'll also add that in addition to the blur effect, so there's the transitioning of parameters, position, size, orientation, visibility. There are even effects. We saw blur, grayscale, and sepia. So you have 3 effects you can also manipulate either at the asset level or the collection level to modify how things look and act in response to other on-screen actions. It's very, very powerful stuff. Seb, I'm going to pause here and see if there are other questions.
Yeah, so I have a few questions about the media sharing. So first one, can I share something other than images? So yes, you can, of course. You can share images, videos, or documents, which are PDF files, through the same mechanism using the same principle of sharing queue, either by file system, USB, or email. And by the way, you can also share images with annotations or space snapshots with annotations the same way. Second one, does sharing via email work on all devices? Yes, again, so it works both on Player for Windows and Player for iPad. Do we store the email addresses? We don't, but you can. The idea is, Jeff, can you maybe show us the email group thing again on the screen, and let's have a look at the different elements inside.
Okay, so let's move this here.
Yeah, move it back
and
inside.
And we want to look at, is it the send button, I guess?
Yes, please. So basically, when the user hits the send button, here is the action which is behind. We are using the share via email hosted send action with 3 parameters. The 2 is bound, this orange feedback. Jeff, can you click on the little arrow, please? Is bound to the text input, which is where the text box with the virtual keyboard, where the user is going to enter his email address. You could add a second action, sending another email to yourself with a body or a subject using what the information you want. You could bound the body to this same text input, for example, or you could also store it in an Excel file to do some kind of logs. That's really up to you. You are free to do what you want with the information entered by the user using the virtual keyboard. And last one, which is on the same window, can I edit the body text of an email and include variables? For example, saying thanks for requesting file X, where X is the file name. So yes, as you see here, the third parameter is the body. So here you can either enter some plain text, some HTML text, or you could bind it to another interface asset that you would create, for example, using the new JavaScript protocol that we support now in 4.5. So you could get several items from a form, for example, and send us all this computed information through an email. So this is it for the body, the edition of the body text of the email. And yeah, that's it for the questions for media sharing on my side.
Thank you, Seb. Yeah, the use of binding is extremely powerful. And although I would never like to say there's advanced features because it implies that it's hard, arguably binding is advanced because it just explodes what you can do with Intuiface, and it takes a little getting used to. It's so flexible that sometimes it's hard to even embrace the potential. Simple examples are what you've seen here, the ability to take the value in a text asset and pass it in as the email address for the to field in an email. Much more advanced ones are maybe for the body of an email. Yes, sir.
Yeah, can you just show us how to create this binding on the to line, for example? Yeah, so here, for example, we are bound to the text parameter of the text input. If you want to create another one, so you could bind to the font color, to the font, to any other item of your space, just select it and select its property. So that's very easy to do.
That's right. That's right. Very easy to do, and a lot of opportunity to create more dynamic experiences that respond to actions at runtime rather than having to anticipate and guess what you're going to need to have happen at design time. Same thing for interface assets in general. It allows you to have a much more dynamic aspect to your experience. You don't have to pre-build anything. These are not static slides. We've discussed animation. We've discussed media sharing. Let's now focus on the third key feature in version 4.5, which is experience publishing and sharing. Before 4.5, if I wanted to give an experience to a colleague, I would zip up the project, copy it to a USB drive, copy it to a file share, a network file share. My colleague would grab that copy and put it on their own PC, unzip it, and there you go. I've just shared my experience. It works. It's also very brute force, a little awkward, not ideal if you're working with clients rather than with just work colleagues. We have built in a brand new capability enabling you to publish your experiences to multiple cloud share providers so they are accessible to anyone with an internet connection, and then share those experiences simply by entering an email address. Under the File menu, let's save this thing. Under the File menu, if I select Publish, I'm saying, please copy this experience to the cloud data store I have pre-configured in Management Console. Some of you might know Management Console as the tool that you use to automatically deploy, drag and drop deployment to remote PCs. It is now enhanced to support Publish as well. So let me select Publish. And what we're saying is, please copy this experience to my cloud share. You'll notice it says on Dropbox, I have configured Management Console to default to Dropbox. It's my own Dropbox account. It's not Intuit Labs. It's my office's. It's my personal account. It's my client's account. I have access to it. That's the point. And I am now copying, publishing this experience to that share. You can also use Amazon S3 and Box So out of the gate, version 4.5 allows you to publish to Dropbox, Amazon S3, and Box. And in fact, you can configure multiple accounts at the same time. The way it works with Enterprise Edition, with the paid edition of our software, is you have a failover. You can fill up your default share, and once it fills up, we know to use the next share that you've configured. So if Dropbox fills up, then it can use Box, for example. So a bit of a fail-safe. It's interesting. I happen to have a Dropbox shared folder on my PC, so I can actually see the copy process as it's occurring,
And
as
by the
we're
way,
pushing this experience to the cloud. Yes, Eb?
yeah, Jeff, just to interrupt you very quickly, we have a question about publishing the XP in the cloud. If I republish an experience which is already in the cloud, do I have to upload everything again? So the answer is no, of course. So this is the first time Jeff publishes this experience, so it takes few seconds to publish every media embedded in the experience. If you work again, hit save, publish again, you will have some differential upload to the cloud storage you selected.
It's a mechanism that is also used for automated deployment, and it's very important. You can imagine if you have, it's possible, a gigabyte-sized experience. If you tweak an image, you don't want to have to copy another gigabyte over to the remote device. And we don't do that. We only copy over what has changed. And the same mechanism is used for publishing to the cloud if you want to share an experience. It's a differential upload. So it's very advantageous in terms of time and sanity. You'll notice that after I'm done publishing from Composer, that Management Console is automatically opened in my browser, and an information panel about that very specific experience is open for me as well. So here's my experience. I can give it a description, greatest experience ever, and I can share it. So let me use the same email address I use for the email, and what's going to happen is when I click share, it's going to send that email address an email saying, hey, somebody just shared an experience with you. And if that email address has an associated Intuiface account, there'll be a little button that says open it in Composer. Let's go to my inbox. Jeffrey Besson has shared an Intuiface experience with you. And here it is. We're getting a black box here. Normally, I'm not sure why that's happening, so that's our bug for the webinar. Normally, you would have a screenshot of the experience, so you have an idea of what's in there. Here's my description, and since intuilabdemo@gmail.com has an Intuiface account, there's a button that says open with Intuiface, and if I click it, Composer opens and will highlight this shared experience in the My Experiences panel, which I'll show you in a moment. If I didn't have an Intuiface account, the button would say download Intuiface. So we're sensitive to whether or not you already have an Intuiface account. So here's the email that I received. Let's go back to Composer and just take a look at that Experiences panel. If this was the intuilabdemo@gmail.com account, then this icon would look a little bit different. Here's the experience we just created with Composer. Because I created it, it's telling me that I've published it and that the version on my PC is synced with the cloud. That's what that icon is telling me. Okay. If I look down a little bit, this experience was shared with me. That's what the little guy means next to the icon. This experience was shared with me, and I haven't downloaded a version yet, so it's only in the cloud. It's still waiting for me to download. To simplify your ability to browse through this window, you could have tons of experiences in here. We've added some filters. So show me experiences created by me, shared with me on this computer, as well as being able to sort by date and by alphabetical order. This enables me as a business, if I'm a creative agency, for example, I can now create experiences and much more easily share it with my client. I use my own Dropbox account, post it, publish it up there, and then share it using the email address of my client. They get an email, they can download the experience, and they even know when you've made a change. They will be notified inside Composer. That's what this cloud icon means. This little number in the tab is telling me how many experiences I need to download because I'm either out of sync or I haven't downloaded yet. If I'm out of sync, I'm told to do that, and if I was a client, I can download the update, which is a differential download. I don't have to wait for another gigabyte, if it's that big. So it significantly accelerates the ease with which you can share experiences both internally and externally. Seb, any other questions about this?
Yes, just a few questions. So first one will be, is there a sharing size limit? Yes and no. As you could see, it depends on the cloud storage you set up in your page. In the management console, Jeff, can you maybe show us the ones you have on your account? So basically, for the moment, we support Amazon S3 and Dropbox. Box is coming very soon, probably already released when you watched this video. So depending on the account you have, you can upload, for example, on Jeff Dropbox account, you could have 3.6 gigabytes available to upload your experiences. Next question is, does the person I send my experience to need to have Intuiface already? I guess Jeff already answered this one, but just to mention it again, in the email the person will receive, if the person has Intuiface, it will say open with Intuiface. If he or she doesn't have Intuiface yet, the person will be invited to download the free edition. And which goes to the last question. Can I share using the free edition? So yes, you can use the cloud storage options to publish and share your experiences. Now, the only thing you cannot do, and which will only be available within the Enterprise Edition, is the part you see below on the Intuiface MC management console, which is how to deploy an experience to a device you control. For example, Jeff, can you deploy the one you just created, or well, the one you want, on wall 2, which is the multi-touch wall we have in our office here. So this is how you deploy, when you have an Enterprise Edition version, an experience you published on the cloud, to one of your interface players, if it is connected to the network, of course.
Which apparently it's not.
Okay, I will go and check that in the office.
All right, two issues in the webinar. Great. You got to have a couple.
And that's it for the experience sharing on my side.
Excellent. Yes. So those not familiar with Management Console, I had mentioned earlier, this aspect of Intuiface already existed for enterprise customers, letting them do that drag and drop deploy. It has now been enhanced with this ability to share. So the free edition can do the publish and share. The free edition cannot do drag and drop deploy. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. The objective was to discuss the top 3 new features in version 4.5. Hopefully you now have a good understanding of not only what they are, but how you can use them in the creation of your own experiences. There's the ability to animate multiple aspects of your experience, pretty much any property that has a range of values. You can animate transition from one value to another, plus additional effects such as blur, grayscale, sepia. Then there's media sharing, which includes saving to the file system, saving to USB drive, and 2 email options, both of which can take your images, videos, documents, and use them as attachments, using either Intuilab's free email service or using your own SMTP server. Finally, you can publish any experience to any Dropbox, Amazon S3, or Box account, and then by entering an email address, share that experience with anyone, whether or not they have an Intuiface account. Maybe you can tell I'm pretty proud of this release. I hope at least you're a little impressed. Certainly, I encourage you to try it out. Our goal is to, as best as possible, make this product intuitive, thus the name. Hopefully you can sit down, play with it, and become experts in no time at all. I'm going to open the floor once more for questions, Seb, just in case. Otherwise, I think we're done.
And actually, yeah, I'm muted? Yeah, I am. Actually, we don't have any more questions on the chat room for the moment.
Okay.
So anyone, it's the last minute for the questions. It's just a reminder, we are recording this video and this webinar on the 18th of April. The beta version of 4.5 is already available on the website, so you can already download it. And the general announcement version for the 4.5 will be available end of April, beginning of May. something like this.
Sebastian, thank you very much for your help. Everyone on the webinar, thank you for spending this time with us. If you're listening to the recording, thank you for spending time with us. Everyone have a great day.
Bye bye. Thanks.